A 17-year-old black kid woke up in a hospital room he didn't recognize, surrounded by machines beeping in rhythm with his heartbeat. And the first thing he saw was a lawyer in an expensive suit telling him he was worth $12 million. Marcus had been living in a roach-infested apartment in the Bronx projects his entire life, wearing the same 3 shirts to school every week. And now this stranger was saying his real father had left him everything. The lawyer's words felt like a dream slipping through his fingers. Something too beautiful to be real, too impossible to trust. Marcus tried to sit up, but pain shot through his ribs, reminding him why he was in this hospital bed in the first place. 3 nights ago, he had been jumped by 6 guys outside the corner store, beaten so badly that his face was still swollen and purple, all because he refused to join their crew. He had always refused, always said no to the streets, even when saying no meant going hungry, even when it meant being alone. His mother had died when he was 8 years old, leaving him with his grandmother in apartment for C, a woman who worked 3 jobs just to keep the lights on and food on the table. Marcus remembered his mother's face only in pieces, now fragments of memory that came to him in dreams. Her smile when she sang gospel songs on Sunday mornings, her hands braiding his hair with such gentle precision that he would fall asleep in her lap. The lawyer, Mr. Richardson, explained that Marcus's biological father had been a successful businessman who had a brief relationship with his mother before she got pregnant. A relationship she never told Marcus about because his father had disappeared, moved to California, and built a fortune in real estate. The father had only recently discovered Marcus existed, and by then he was dying of cancer, spending his final months tracking down the son he never knew, leaving behind a will that gave Marcus everything. But there was a condition that made Marcus's stomach twist with anxiety and confusion. He had to move to Los Angeles immediately, live in his father's mansion for 1 full year, attend the private school his father had chosen, and proved he could handle this new life without falling apart. If he failed, if he got into trouble, or dropped out, or ran back to the Bronx, the entire inheritance would go to charity and Marcus would return to the projects with nothing but broken dreams. Mr. Richardson handed him a folder thick with documents, legal papers that meant nothing to Marcus because he had never seen anything like this before, had never even met a lawyer until today. The man's eyes were kind but businesslike, professional in a way that made Marcus feel small and out of place, like he was wearing shoes that didn't fit, trying to walk in a world that wasn't made for kids like him. Marcus looked out the hospital window at the city below, the same city that had raised him with hard lessons and harder nights, the place where he learned that survival meant being invisible, keeping your head down, never drawing attention. He thought about his grandmother, about how she would cry when he told her he was leaving, how she would pretend to be happy, while her heart broke because he was all she had left. The projects had been his whole universe, every corner familiar, every face a reminder of where he came from and what he was supposed to become. His best friend Darnell had already dropped out of school, was already selling on the corner where they used to play basketball as kids, and Marcus knew that same path was waiting for him with patient inevitability if he stayed. The neighborhood had a way of swallowing dreams, of turning bright-eyed children into hard-faced survivors who stopped believing in anything beyond the next day. Marcus had watched it happen to his older cousins, to the guys he grew up with, to everyone who thought they could escape, but found the streets had a gravity stronger than hope. But now, lying in this hospital bed with broken ribs and a split lip, he was being offered something impossible, a doorway to a different life that felt like a trap disguised as salvation. He asked Mr. Richardson why his father never came to find him sooner, why he waited until death was at his door before acknowledging the son he abandoned. The lawyer's face softened, and he explained that Marcus's father had tried to find his mother years ago, but she had moved, changed her name, disappeared into the city's anonymity because she didn't want anything from a man who had left her pregnant and alone. She had pride, the kind of fierce independence that Marcus inherited, the refusal to beg or accept help from someone who hadn't been there when it mattered most. His father had hired investigators, searched for years without success, until finally technology and social media made the impossible possible, revealing that he had a teenage son living in poverty while he lived in luxury. The guilt had consumed him, Mr. Richardson said, had eaten away at him during those final cancer-ridden months when he knew time was running out. He had written letters to Marcus that were included in a folder, dozens of letters explaining, apologizing, trying to build a bridge across 17 years of absence. Marcus didn't want to read them yet. Couldn't face the words of a ghost who thought money could replace a lifetime of missed birthdays and unanswered questions. The decision felt too big for his 17-year-old mind to process, too heavy with consequences that would ripple through his entire future. If he stayed in the Bronx, he knew exactly what would happen because he had seen it play out 1,000 times in the lives around him. He would struggle through school if he didn't drop out first, would work minimum wage jobs that barely covered rent, would watch his grandmother kill herself working until her body gave out. But if he left, if he took this chance, he would be walking into a world that didn't want kids like him, a world where his skin color and his accent and his history would mark him as an outsider no matter how much money he had. He would be alone in ways that scared him more than poverty ever did, isolated in a mansion while his real family suffered without him back home. Marcus signed the papers with a hand that trembled slightly, his signature looking childish and small next to the official legal text, and 3 days later he was on a plane to Los Angeles, leaving behind everything he had ever known. His grandmother had cried exactly the way he predicted, had held him tight, and whispered that his mother would be so proud, that this was the chance she had always wanted for him. Darnell had hugged him in the stairwell of their building and said nothing because there was nothing to say. Just two boys who grew up like brothers, now separated by circumstances that felt crueler than any beating. The plane ride was Marcus's first time flying, first time seeing clouds from above, first time feeling so completely disconnected from the ground that had always defined his existence. He pressed his face against the window and watched New York disappear beneath him, watched his entire life become a memory scattered across miles of sky and distance. When the plane landed in California, a driver in a black suit was waiting with a sign that had Marcus's name spelled perfectly, and the car that drove him to his new home was nicer than any apartment he had ever lived in. The mansion was obscene in its size, and luxury room after room filled with furniture that looked like it belonged in a museum, walls covered with art that Marcus didn't understand. A pool in the backyard that could fit his entire building's courtyard inside it. He walked through the house in silence, his sneakers squeaking on marble floors, feeling like an intruder in someone else's dream. His father's bedroom had been left exactly as it was. Clothes still in the closet, books on the nightstand, photographs on the dresser of a life Marcus was never part of. There were pictures of his father at charity events, at business conferences, shaking hands with politicians and celebrities, living a life of importance and influence, while Marcus ate cereal for dinner and wore shoes with holes. The anger came then, hot and sudden, filling his chest with a rage he didn't know what to do with. He wanted to smash those picture frames, wanted to scream at a dead man who thought a mansion could make up for abandonment. But instead, he just stood there, breathing hard, letting the anger burn through him until it faded into something sadder, something that felt like grief for a father he never knew, and a life that could have been different. School started 2 weeks later at Westbridge Academy, a private institution where the parking lot was filled with luxury cars and the students wore confidence like designer clothes. Marcus walked through those halls, feeling every eye on him, feeling the weight of being the only black kid in most of his classes. The scholarship case from the projects who didn't belong. They didn't say it out loud, but he could feel it in their stares, in the way conversation stopped when he approached. In the subtle distance, they maintained as if poverty was contagious. His teachers were kind in that performative way that felt worse than honest cruelty, always asking if he needed extra help, speaking slower when they addressed him as if he didn't understand English. He wanted to tell them he had been getting A's at his old school despite having no books and studying by streetlight. Wanted to prove he was smarter than their assumptions. But his pride kept him silent. He ate lunch alone for the first month, sitting in corners with headphones on, pretending he didn't care about the isolation while it hollowed him out from the inside. At night, he would call his grandmother and lie about how great everything was, paint pictures of friendship and belonging that didn't exist, because he couldn't bear to add his sadness to her worries. The only person who treated him like a human being was Emma, a girl with red hair and freckles who sat next to him in English class and actually asked him questions about his life. She didn't tiptoe around his background or treat him like a charity case, just talked to him like he was interesting, like his opinions mattered. They started studying together, then eating lunch together, and slowly Marcus felt the crushing loneliness begin to lift. Emma told him about her own struggles, how her parents were getting divorced and fighting over money in ways that made her sick, how everyone at school thought she had a perfect life, when really she was barely holding it together. Marcus realized that pain didn't discriminate by zip code, that suffering could live in mansions just as easily as in project apartments, and this understanding created a bridge between them. For the first time since arriving in California, he felt like maybe he could survive this. Maybe he could build something real in this fake world of privilege and pretense. But the streets have a long memory, and the past doesn't let go easily, especially when you come from where Marcus came from. One afternoon, he came home to find Darnell sitting in his living room, brought there by circumstances that made Marcus's blood run cold with fear and responsibility. Darnell had gotten into serious trouble back in New York, the kind of trouble that meant prison or worse, and he had run to the one person he thought could save him. Marcus looked at his best friend, saw the desperation in his eyes, saw the gun tucked in his waistband, and realized that his two worlds were colliding in a way that could destroy everything. Darnell wanted money, wanted Marcus to use his inheritance to pay off the people who were hunting him, wanted his brother to save his life the way they had always protected each other growing up. The request was impossible and completely reasonable at the same time. Because what kind of friend has millions while his brother faces death? Marcus felt the walls of the mansion closing in on him, felt the weight of two identities tearing him apart, the kid from the projects and the heir to a fortune, two versions of himself that couldn't coexist. He had 1 week left before Mr. Richardson would come to check on his progress, 1 week before his inheritance became official and irreversible, and now Darnell's problems threatened to destroy everything his father's guilt money had built. Marcus spent 3 days in agony, torn between loyalty and survival, between the code of the streets and the rules of his new world, unable to sleep or think clearly. He knew that giving Darnell money wouldn't solve anything, would just delay the inevitable, because the streets always collected their debts one way or another. But he also knew that turning his back on his best friend would destroy something essential in himself, would make him into the kind of person who forgot where he came from the moment life got comfortable. Emma found him sitting by the pool at midnight, staring at the water like it held answers, and he told her everything because he had no one else to tell. She listened without judgment, without offering easy solutions. And then she said something that changed everything in Marcus's mind. She told him that saving Darnell didn't mean giving him money. It meant helping him escape the same trap Marcus had escaped, giving him a chance to become someone different. The idea seemed impossible at first, naive in its optimism, but the more Marcus thought about it, the more he realized it was the only real solution. He called Mr. Richardson and explained the situation with an honesty that could have cost him everything. Admitted that his past had followed him to California and he needed help that only the lawyer could provide. Mr. Richardson listened in silence, and then did something Marcus never expected, something that revealed the kind of man his father had been beneath the guilt and absence. The lawyer explained that Marcus's father had created a foundation in his will, money set aside specifically to help kids from situations like Marcus's, to give them opportunities that circumstance had denied. It wasn't operational yet, wasn't supposed to launch until Marcus turned 21, but if Marcus wanted to use it now, if he wanted Darnell to be the first person it helped, then Mr. Richardson would make it happen. The condition was that Darnell had to really want it, had to be willing to leave New York, start over, get his G, and prove he was serious about changing his life. Marcus knew his friend well enough to know this would be the hardest thing Darnell had ever done, harder than surviving the streets, because it meant admitting he needed help, admitting the life he knew was killing him. He sat Darnell down in that massive living room and laid out the choice with brutal honesty. Told him he could have money to run or he could have a chance to live, but he couldn't have both. The silence that followed stretched out like years. Darnell's face cycling through anger and pride and fear before finally he broke down crying in a way Marcus had never seen crying, for everything they had lost, for the childhood the projects had stolen from them both. Darnell agreed and moved into the mansion's guest house, started attending adult education classes, met with counselors who helped him process trauma he didn't even know he was carrying. It wasn't easy and it wasn't linear. There were days when Darnell wanted to quit, wanted to go back to what he knew, because change is terrifying even when you're changing into something better. But Marcus was there every day, studying alongside him, reminding him why they were doing this, refusing to let his brother give up. At school, Emma introduced Marcus to her friends, and slowly he stopped being the outsider, stopped being the project kid, and became just Marcus, someone with stories and humor and intelligence that had nothing to do with his bank account. He joined the basketball team and discovered that the court was the same in every neighborhood, that the language of the game transcended the divisions that separated their worlds. His grades climbed because he finally had the resources to thrive, books and tutors, and time to focus, proving what he had always known, which was that he had never lacked intelligence, only opportunity. The anger toward his absent father didn't disappear, but it transformed into something more complicated. A grief mixed with gratitude, an understanding that people are flawed and broken in ways that don't erase their attempts at redemption. 1 year after arriving in California, Mr. Richardson came for his final evaluation, ready to declare whether Marcus had fulfilled the terms of his inheritance. The lawyer walked through the mansion, reviewed Marcus's grades, met Darnell, who was 3 months away from getting his G, and then he sat Marcus down in the same living room where this all began. Mr. Richardson smiled and told him that his father would have been proud not because Marcus had maintained the mansion or stayed out of trouble, but because he had used his inheritance to help someone else escape the cycle that destroys so many. The lawyer revealed that Marcus's father had grown up poor himself, had clawed his way out of poverty, and spent his life trying to atone for the people he stepped on in his climb, which was why he created the foundation, why he gave Marcus the chance he gave him. The inheritance was officially Marcus's now, irrevocable and complete. $12 million and the responsibility that came with it. But Marcus realized that the real inheritance wasn't the money. It was the lesson his father had learned too late. That wealth means nothing if you use it to isolate yourself from the suffering you escaped. He expanded the foundation immediately, brought more kids from the Bronx to California, gave them the same chance he gave Darnell, created a pipeline from poverty to possibility. His grandmother moved to Los Angeles and cried happy tears in a house with no roaches, finally able to rest after decades of struggle. The kid from the projects learned that redemption is possible, but it requires facing the parts of yourself you were most ashamed of, accepting help even when pride screams against it, and remembering where you came from even as you move towards something better. He learned that family isn't just blood. It's the people who show up when showing up is hard, who believe in you when you've stopped believing in yourself. Marcus's story isn't about rags to riches. It is about understanding that the richness that matters isn't in your bank account, but in your ability to lift others as you rise, to transform pain into purpose, to prove that one person's choice to change can create ripples that reach further than any inheritance ever could.